going to be live in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the Moscow Administrative Committee on August 25th, 2014. And our first item is approval of the August 11th minutes.
I make a motion that we approve those minutes.
All right.
I have no opinion.
Okay, and motion stands approved. Introductions are probably in order. I got a little ahead of myself. We've got Art Becky sitting in for Tom Lamar, who is taking some personal time. I'm Wayne Krause, John Weber, and joining us is Gary Riedner. Okay.
Good afternoon.
Second item on the agenda is the request from the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust for match funds. Presenting that will be Gary Riedner and Bill Belknap.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, John.
I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Trust, the CHOTO. I'm not a officer of that, but I am a member. I'm also a member of the City Council. I checked with the City Attorney, and he said, under a strict interpretation, I would not have a conflict of interest because I expect, nor will I ever get any financial gain from either one of the organizations. Okay. But in order to make sure that there's not even the sense of impropriety, I'm going to recuse myself, sit in the audience, and let you gentlemen handle it.
All right. Prior to doing that, I'm going to have to call about a 3-minute recess. The battering in my hearing aid has gone down, and it won't do me a whole lot of good to sit here if I really can't. Mr. Belknap speaks softly and carries a big stick. And if I don't hear him, he'll hit me with the big stick. So we will take about a 3-minute recess. request from the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust for match funds. Councilmember John Weber has recused himself because he sits on the board of directors. Who wants to start?
I can start. This is a request, and you have in your backup a request from the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust to access $20,000 of funding that has been budgeted in our non-departmental section of our budget. This first was put in the budget in 2012. Was $20,000. It was put in the budget as a match to a private donation that the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, I think, was not even formed fully at the time. Is that correct, Carl? Or had just barely been?
Was formed.
And there was a private donation of $20,000 to assist the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust at that time. Mayor Cheney, when she was in office, we had Carl had come forward as the president of the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust and asked whether the city, in furtherance of its fair and affordable housing efforts, would be willing to budget an amount of money to go toward affordable housing and assist the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust in their mission. So that was budgeted in 2012, again in 2013, accessed in neither of those years, and was budgeted again in FY 2014, which is our current budget year. Carl and their executive director, Nils Peterson, came and talked to Mayor Lambert and myself several weeks ago, asking, as they're moving forward on a couple of different issues, they are seeking funds, as pointed out in the letter, to assist the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust in becoming a community housing development organization and for assistance in setting up, I guess, operations, if you will. Carl can talk about their efforts in moving that forward, but that essentially is the request that you have before you today.
So is the money from 14 budget year? The current budget year?
Yes, it's in the budget. And just by way of history, we've had differing amounts of money in that line item in the past. Mostly we split it out after a while, but we have had anywhere from $15,000 to $5,335, depending on what the needs were. The $15,000 budget, or 20, I can't remember which exactly it was. It was several years ago to participate in the formation of a community housing development organization. Then, of course, as that was paid, there was, I think, a match, wasn't it, the $5,000?
Yeah, I think just a little over $5,000 was the only thing the city has expended so far to assist the trust, and those funds were used as matching funds to a HUD technical assistance grant that Community Frameworks out of Spokane had. And Community Frameworks works with organizations like the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust in helping them get established, go through their articles of incorporation, become a 501c3 with the IRS, and to go through that full process. So the city did contribute just a little over $5,000 of match money for that effort and for that assistance that Community Frameworks provided to the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. But that's been the only expenditure of city funds that I'm aware of.
So with that, as I talked to Carl and Mr. Peterson the other day, when this was initially presented, the city was very supportive of the affordable housing efforts, and it was felt several years ago that a CHODO was the way to go, so that's why the city was willing to support that. I think there had been a feeling that it would go toward a project that was identified, and Carl can certainly comment on that if he likes. But it sounds like they need to access these funds now in order to continue their mission. And with that, I'd ask Carl if he's got anything.
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, I'll be as brief as I can. I'm open to any questions you may have, but we're very thankful for the city's support that Gary's mentioned so far. It's gotten us where we are now. The private donation of $20,000 has enabled us to hire a part-time professional manager, which is one of the requirements for recognition by Housing and Urban Development as a CHODO. We've tentatively been granted that recognition pending some minor adjustments to some of our paperwork. Once that's approved, we'll be eligible for 2 years of support funding, but that will not happen until 2015. That's the next budget year for that money to be distributed. So the initial $20,000 has carried us this far, but it will not be enough for us to develop a project that we would hope that we could start working towards in 2015. So we need to cover that gap and make this money specifically project-based. We have a couple of different projects that we have in mind. I'd be happy to share you a little bit about what those might look like so you can get a better picture of what we're doing. We're intending to build single-family affordable housing that's not available currently in Moscow. We feel there's a lot of workforce members that are living outside of Moscow or currently renting houses that would like to be homeowners if they could find modern, clean, affordable housing that they could get into. There's only two ways to provide affordability, beyond what the private sector can do. Either there has to be subsidy or there has to be higher density, and we plan to use some of both. So a picture of what one of those developments might look like is here from a project that was done in Boise. So that'll give you some visual concept of what we might be talking about. So we've identified a couple of parcels that could be eligible for that type of development. One on South Main Street, which would be a fairly large development and could contain as many as 25 home sites. And then on the back of that form is a parcel on Kenneth Street that could lend itself to a bit of a smaller development. So I mentioned the subsidy part. We are eligible for a federal housing and urban development program called SHOP, Single Housing Opportunity Plan, and that can grant up to $15,000 per home site. That could provide subsidy which would help bring down the cost of the home. So before we were to ever develop either of these sites or even make an offer to acquire them for development would require considerable amount of expenditures in design work, for architects, consultants, engineers. We would have to have a crystal clear picture of what our cost to develop the site would be to assure that any offer we made to acquire land for development would ensure that the land was not so expensive that it was unaffordable. So that is where we're at with the need for additional funding to help us provide that information to make an offer to move a project forward.
Beyond this, which sounds really good because Moscow badly needs affordable housing, but what would status as a community housing organization enable the city to get? Is that enable us to get more grants through HUD or things like that? What's the advantage?
You cannot access federal HOME, H-O-M-E, federal program for housing. You cannot access that money unless you are a approved community housing development organization. Now, we are not a entitlement community, so we do not have direct access to those funds. We have to apply for them through Idaho Housing and Finance Association. So this will give us access to some of that funding for comparable to what larger communities have always had access to. For instance, Pocatello has two different housing development organizations. One is a city organization that has direct access to entitlement money, and a second one that's a CHODO that applies for IHFA money, just like we would. So this will give us our only access and first access to those funds.
What kind of a price range were these houses, for instance, here? What would you anticipate here in Moscow?
We would anticipate a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-car garage home similar to that, maybe at around $140,000. Now, our plan is that the affordability part would require that homeowners be between the 50 and 80% of area median income. And so that is about the maximum affordability for somebody in that range.
And this would include home and lot that they would be?
At this point, it would be include the lot. Initially, we had hoped to be a community land trust,
right,
where the organization would buy and continue to own the land. We have been unable to find a source of funding to make that happen. That is ultimately the best way to ensure continued affordability, but the funding is not available for that. So continuing affordability would be maintained through the modest size, the smaller lot size, and also through deed restrictions.
So then my next question is to Bill, and that is, as far as our land use regulations that we currently have on the books, this, I would assume something like this would have to be a planned unit development, a PUD?
It would depend upon the individual site, but these two sites appear to be PUD style of development due to the street frontage and the different lotting pattern. If you wanted to be able to sell the lots with fee simple interest and ownership, it's likely these would be PUDs.
And given that it would be, then we could allow it to be a PUD, does it still fall within our current zoning codes?
Ultimately, we'll have to look at what the proposals are, and the PUD does give you a great range of flexibility of uses and lot patterns and private access. So I would anticipate that they could certainly be accommodated through the PUD process.
I'm trying to look at how this type of a development would be different than, for instance, Green Acres.
There would be some similarities to that. We would hope that we're going to put a little more emphasis on design and hopefully come up with something that is more appealing aesthetically and also not quite so confusing in the financing arrangements.
But aren't the homes in Green Acres actually sell for a higher value than the $140,000 that you're talking about? So that's my question: is how, if it's a similar type PUD, how you're going to be able to keep your costs down with a like sizable type house?
Well, the subsidy of $15,000 per home site would substantially reduce that cost.
Okay.
So I think it's something that we need, more affordable housing, and this provides us a good start on that. I'm also excited to see the 2 locations for the proposed projects. That's also good, and also helps us with revitalizing some kind of blighted areas, which is also a great thing. Reuse things closer to center of town. So I'm pretty enthusiastic, yes.
Yep. No, I agree. Gary?
Yeah, I would note that this is a fairly unique circumstance. This isn't a project that's being brought to you at this time asking for your participation.
It's a step toward it.
Yes, and that is one of the things that we have not done in the past. We hardly, or should I say, never in my recollection have we given seed money for an organization to move forward. Now, this is an offshoot of work that was done by the Fair and Affordable Housing Commission, so it certainly is something the council has had some interest in, and I think probably had that in mind when they put this money in the budget. However, it's one of those situations where if you grant this and you're granting access to this $20,000 by the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust for use in conformance with essentially what's in the letter. In the future, and that's more of what I'm concerned about, in the future as projects are brought forward, I want to make sure that the council would put something in place that each project would have to stand on its own merits, including, as Carl has indicated, there are different ways to maintain the affordability of these housing developments. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. Carl's mentioned a couple of them: deed restrictions, trusts. There are different ways you can do that. And I would expect that as these projects are developed, if there is further assistance requested from the council, that each of those project developments would have to stand on its own merits. In other words, this is not a continuing subsidy or assistance in any way.
Yep, I think it's pretty clear, and I think just moving forward to get status as a community housing organization would facilitate other grants, and so we could leverage any further contributions on a case-by-case basis into a multiplying effect and access more dollars to help with the whole affordable housing in this area. And that's kind of how I see this as a first step in that direction.
I agree with Art. I think it's been, 5 or 6 years ago when I was council liaison to fair and affordable housing. And my goodness, we were talking about this then. Carl, you have stuck with this through thick and thin. And your knowledge on how we can move forward with this, I think, is pretty vast right now. You've really turned over about every stone I think that you can. And I like this idea. Gary, you're right. You were verbalizing my thoughts is if something like this comes again, it most certainly will stand on its own merits. This is not something that we're just going to suddenly just give a blanket coverage to. So I would definitely approve of this also, and of course we would like to see this on the regular agenda, not a consent agenda item.
Certainly. Is there any other information you'd ask Carl and the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust to provide you prior to coming to council next Tuesday?
I'd like to see a little more, something written down about exactly what a community housing organization status will help us leverage in the future. Because that seems to be part of what this initial matching funding is about, is to obtain that status. So I'd like to see a little more about that from my own information mostly. I can't speak for the other council people.
Well, I think that's good, and also I think some visual aids such as this, but perhaps on the screen, with what your goals would look like on down the road, the type of development, how it would look like. Particularly addressing my concerns that I had is how this is going to be different than the Green Acres subdivision PUD that was put together, and how that. And I like what you're saying about the financing not being complicated. That's my understanding with Green Acres. The financing can get a little complicated in that particular organization. Although, if you take a look at it, it's been pretty successful. It's built out, and it looks. I think it looks really well. It looks really good. So anyway, I'm pleased to see this moving forward, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Monday at the council meeting.
Very good.
Okay, we'll put that on the regular agenda. Thank you. Thank you, Carl.
Well, the next item is a request for the city to provide IS support to Smart Transit. Jesse Flowers will be presenting that. Hi, Jesse.
Afternoon.
Tell us what you have in mind.
We've had some conversations over the past couple months with Smart Transit to see if we could help them work a bit better. Met with Jenny and Tara out there, looked at their operation. They have a fairly basic computer operation. I figure we could actually take on support for them to provide updates, patches, file server, backups, things of that nature without too much work. They have, one of the issues driving it is the server they're currently using is approaching end of life for Microsoft and will not receive more updates, so they're going to have to make a move one way or another. And they would sure like to have some professional IS support going to help them with what they're doing. The city already provides them phone service and network access through our connection in the fiber back to City Hall, so we'd just be extending our services a bit to them. I'm ready to answer any questions you might have. We're just looking for direction of this is something that...
Gary?
Okay, and just by way of full disclosure, Mr. Kraus, you're the president of Smart Transit, and I am on the board as well. This is a situation where we already participate with Smart Transit's mission. In last year's budget, $110,000 plus $25,000, which was just granted at the last council meeting for match for purchase of a bus. In next year's budget, the amount is $120,000. This is something that, again, as they expend funds for information services, then that's money they can't provide to public transit in Moscow. the amount of value of our information systems department providing that service in a city building. The Intermodal Transit Center is a building that's owned by the city, and as Jess indicated, is served now by our telephone service, and we provide fiber access. Any additional funds or the value of services provided allows Smart Transit to utilize those as in-kind match for further FTA grants as well, which directly supports the bus service.
I'd like to interject your comment that the Smart Transit is located in a city-owned building, which is very true, bearing in mind that Smart Transit is a 501c3 and does pay rent for their space within that building.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is some of the hardware would have to be upgraded.
Yes, they would.
And this will be at Smart Transit's expense. So it's not, I'd like it clear that the city is not subsidizing Smart Transit any further than what you have already mentioned. John?
Actually, having read this a couple of times, I think it's a good idea. I really like the idea of using the in-kind as possible leverage for future grants, and I'm always in favor of being able to use in-kind instead of writing someone a check. So it's got my support.
I think it looks good, too. Is there any projection, because it says in the packet here that this doesn't include any new projects or additional services, is there any possibility of mission creep in here, or are we pretty well locked down to what the services iterated in the list are?
I've never seen a project that doesn't have mission creep. And especially as we get into it, we'll probably find other things that we can do to help them and assist. But part of the question was, how locked down should we make the contract? I don't like to say, I'm sorry, that wasn't on your approved thing. Good luck. But at the same time, we also need to balance our demands for the department and available time.
I'm thinking about how far down the road one might go before it rises to the level of, we're kind of getting out there.
Yeah.
Mike?
Gary?
One of the reasons that I was supportive of this proposal is the estimation by Jess is 8 hours a month, which is a huge, it's a significant amount of time, don't get me wrong, but in the overall scheme of things, probably not. I agree with Yart, it is possible, and there are some programs that SMART uses. Route Match is one of the programs that they are dealing with the state on, and a private vendor, and there may be some consultations and that sort of thing. We would develop the contract so it would limit it to basic information services support. And for special projects, anything like that, it would be at the discretion of somebody, whether it's the IS director or my office, administration, something, so that we wouldn't get sucked into this black hole. The contract would be written so that the base services are what we're supporting.
Sweet.
As you can see from the description, 8 hours is not a substantial amount of time per month, and of course that's an estimate. I think that goes to an indication that the requirements and needs of Smart Transit are fairly minimal. It's pretty much a standalone system. It works well. They're not, other than the route match, which is quite sophisticated. The rest of the programs that they're utilizing are base programs, nothing of extraordinary nature. So while there's always some mission creep, I think you need to put a definition on that. There may be an expansion of services needed down the road as Smart Transit grows. There's potential for that.
Yep. But I like if the language is included in the contract that anything that grows too big needs approval from somebody up the chain. Fine with me.
Sure.
And we will be tracking our activity and our time, so we can actually add a value of what the city is providing Smart Transit for this grant match, and also so I have a good idea of how much time is going to support that and what the issues are.
Okay. Anything else, John?
No.
I see Walter's in the audience. He'd like to make a comment. Come on up, Walter.
Thank you, Walter Steve, Musco City Council. Wayne, I was kind of half listening and may not have heard it correctly, but did you say that this would not require additional contribution by the city in addition to what Gary has already enumerated?
Correct.
It would require the 8 hours.
Right.
Okay, so no cash
No.
addition?
No, there's no cash.
Okay.
But there is an upgrade. The Smart Transit will have to upgrade their hardware to some extent, and this will be up to Jesse's recommendation as to what's updated, but Smart Transit will be paying for that hardware.
Okay, but you were not implying that Smart Transit was going to pay the city for the 8 hours. That would be
That's correct.
a city contribution.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right. Thumbs up.
Oh, yes.
I think we can roll that into the consent agenda.
Okay.
And that's actually all we have on the agenda itself. We do have some reports, and first one is going to be from Jen Piffner. Apparently, we're going to have a downtown block party. Ooh. Anxious to hear about that. Oh, looks like Gina's going to come talk about it, too.
Storm the castle with her. Please.
I'm sorry, your name's not on my sheet here, so.
Do you want me to go back and sit back there?
All the way in the back.
Always happy
I'm
here.
crushed.
Jen, what do you got?
Gina's working with us on this project, and so since she was here, I thought it would be a great time for her to come up and talk about it as well. We're looking at scheduling a downtown block party, and this is a welcome back event for our students.
Sorry.
Mayor Lambert brought this up several months ago, saying, hey, it would be a really good idea to get people downtown, get our students out and about, and so we've come up with a plan to do just that. We're looking at Friday, September 26th for the event. We would be closing Main Street from 1st Street to 6th Street, with 3rd Street remaining open. And we've got some great business contacts at either end that are kind of managing, getting everybody on board. It's not taking much. They're really excited about it. And in addition, we'll take 2 bands, put one on the south side, one on the north side, and provide the entertainment, and then also invite all of our students down to visit with us, all of our community members, and just have a really good time that evening is the plan.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us.
I'd always love to stick my 2 cents in on this. I think this came in early in my tenure as mayor, that I thought this would be a terrific thing to get the university as well as the downtown Chamber of Commerce and businesses as well as the city of Moscow together to do something which we've never done before that I know of, to get that spirit back, the vandal spirit that we need in this town, and it's a big deal with the university as well as for our city to move forward on. And I thought it'd be a terrific way of introducing new students. And it's Dad's Weekend, incidentally. There are going to be a lot of dads in town that weekend, to get a bunch of people involved from the university as well as downtown merchants, which Gina and I are going to be trucking around here in the next few weeks talking to a lot of businesses downtown about this, because it's an opportunity for them to expose themselves and maybe give some specials and do some different things.
If I can jump in, having our event on the north end of Main Street as well is huge. It's really, really a great development. So everybody's really excited. And like Mayor Lambert said, we're going to be wandering around, visiting with everybody and kind of getting the enthusiasm going, but it's already there. So it's really kind of exciting.
Well, I see we talk entertainment. First we have Voodoo City Radio. Sounds a little scary, but...
It is a little scary.
Well, you got to step out of the box a little bit here, Wayne.
Right. Simba and the exceptional act. There's one thing that's not mentioned in here.
Mm-hmm. What's that?
Food.
We're working on that piece. We're working on that piece. With all of our merchants downtown, we're encouraging them to, of course, be open for the event and maybe do some different specials if they're interested, if something like that comes up. And then also looking at our other community members and business owners that are outside of Main Street, if they're interested in having a booth or having some sort of presence downtown, we'll accommodate for that as well. So looking at those 2 things, and then perhaps market vendors for food and some different things like that.
Given our recent experiences, are there any contingencies for inclement weather?
It's on the list. Yeah, that is one thing that we're just kind of keeping an open mind and being very optimistic about at this point.
It's
quite the operation to move in.
Weather will just get wet.
It's true.
Good attitude.
It's true.
One thing about that, it would be terrific for all counselors to be down there that evening. It's going to run from 6 to 9. It's going to be a fun event.
Well, I asked you about food.
Well, there's lots of places to buy stuff, and we don't want to take that away from our entrepreneurs that are going to open up and give specials, too.
Exactly.
Gary?
Yeah, one of the things, as you recall, last fall, there was discussion, or earlier this spring, regarding the emphasis of the university to try and not have every activity revolving around alcohol. Now, local merchants, if they're free to be open for business. There will be no beer garden that's set up, certainly not sponsored by the city or anything. But that's why Gina and the mayor are going to try to get some merchants to give some food specials and those sorts of things. It really ties right in with our Legacy Crossing plan to somehow create that synergy between the students and downtown. And by getting them downtown to see what people have to offer, especially in light of the bus service and where you can get on in foot in Moscow, we think it'd be a great welcome back and an introduction, if you will, to the new people up at the University of Idaho.
Hey, it's a great idea. Whose idea was it to begin with?
Mr. Mayor.
Well, you know, I have these visions, but it's not me that puts it together. It's these ladies right to the left of me here that can come up with the ideas.
Whose bright idea?
Well, I thought
you don't even sleep at night, do you, Bill?
No, not really.
Lay there and think of these. That's a great idea. I'm excited about that. I think
They'll come together pretty quickly.
As far as food, we've got so many restaurants downtown with
Yes, sir.
sidewalk seating,
There's bagel places, Mexican food,
betcha.
Chinese food,
You
so on and
betcha.
so forth.
All right. Anything else on that?
No, good idea.
Do it. It will be nice.
It will be, yes. Thank you.
Gina will see to that.
I will.
Practice up my Simba dancing.
I want to see that. I'm taking movies of that one. Art Walk. Kathleen, are you here? Yeah, there you are. Oh.
You're back.
You're back.
I'm back again.
We need to get just a plaque made up for Gina. I think.
See what I can do.
I would love that. It would make me feel really special. Okay, I can't see that. Right on.
Yeah. What number do you push for full screen? F what?
I think you just go down to the lower right and push
Or
it
go
on
to
the screen.
slideshow and say start from the beginning.
It's not really a slideshow. Okay. Oh, thanks. Got to it. There we go. Okay, so this report's been pushed back a couple times this summer, and we're finally here, but Art Walk was June 13th, which was a couple months ago, and so I thought I'd give a recap of the event. This year was our 10th annual, and I put the police shield on the front because the City of Moscow Police Department participated in Art Walk this year and unveiling their new badge on the exterior of the building. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Very cool.
And that's a local artist, James Lozar from Troy. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then this is the timeline. I think it's really important to realize how long it takes to plan an event of this magnitude. So we start in January, just like the farmers market, we start in November for the 2015 season. So the Art Walk event starts planning with the planning committee January 2015. We'll start for the June event in 15. So this is just a list of the planning opportunities that we have. This was the subcommittee that worked on Art Walk this year. And it just, we had 3 members of our Arts Commission, Robin Olgrim, the chair, Robin Lopez from Casa Lopez, and then Mac Pierce, who's a student from U of I in sculpture. And then you can see where we had the Kenworthy represented and Nicole with the Water Department, Melissa Rockwood. We had a couple local artists. And then we invited MZ to participate because they were going to do their opening night, and we wanted them involved. And then Gina's sitting next to me because she was heavily involved in it. And high school students, and then New St. Andrews, the Pritchard played a pretty heavy role, and also the University of Idaho. So if I look at their meeting times, they totaled 7 hours in meeting time just for preparation of Art Walk and the planning committee. But then they also distributed a lot of materials, whether it was applications to businesses, posters, door signs. This committee did a lot with that. These are all your different host locations for Art Walk 2014. And we put them in alphabetical order for you. These are all the artists that participated this year in Art Walk. And this was the promotion that we did to generate folks to come to Art Walk. We had it on the City of Moscow website. We also had it on the Chamber website. We utilized a variety of different distribution lists. We ran it in the Arts Update, which DJ does every other week, every month of the year. We requested, people requested copies of Save the Date and the brochure to use for their personal lists, whether that was the Damon Barn or the Pullman Arts Commission in Pullman. A lot of people have their own lists, Plus Women Artists. Then we sent it out to previous Art Walk artists, previous host locations, a variety of community groups, placed it on different community calendars. And then the big emphasis this year, which is why Gina's here, was planning for the Republican Convention and distribution of the brochure at the convention. And then we also did a video just for the convention that was ongoing. And then, of course, we had the guide inserted and the front page of the sticky note placed in the Lewiston Tribune and also the Moscow Pullman Daily News. Inland 360, which is a Thursday tab, did a cover artist article on Tom Garfield, our cover artist. We also had students call us from Argonaut and the Evergreen newspapers, and they ran articles as well. And then, of course, we had the posters, the door signs, curb signs, and then also mapping. So that's just a little snapshot of what we did for promotion. This was your cover artist this year, Tom Garfield. This was a pastel, Butte with a View. And this is in the city's collection now, and it actually lives in the IS department in their new office out at the Egan. We had music on Friendship Square, and we started with the Plus Jazz Project from 5 to 6, and this is Vanessa Siebert. She's one of the chairs of the music department, Lionel Hampton School of Music. We had the Moscow Arts Commission Band from 6 to 7. We had Diamond Joe from 7 to 8. And we started with the Hog Heaven Band, but then it poured.
Yeah, it poured.
We also unveiled the new Transit Center sculptures out at your Transit Center, and that's Art 340 with Casey Doyle's students. We also had your new vinyl wraps installed in time for Art Walk, which was 3rd and Main with John Larkin, 6th and Main with Iris Mays, DN US 95 with Laurel McDonald, and then Line Highway 8 with Julian Ewart. We added food booths this year to Main Street. We asked a lot of our vendors in the farmers market if they were wanting to be a part of Art Walk, and some of them chose to do that. So we had Sisters Cookies, Sticky Fingers Farm, Vincula Enterprises, Mila, Humble Burger, and Parlor Wood-Fired Cookery or Pizza. So they were all on Main Street as well. This is our budget for Art Walk. I like to do a recap of revenue versus expenses and sponsorship. So these are the dollars that Gritman, New St. Andrews, and the Pritchard Gallery contributed to the event. Our revenue was $8,320. Our list of expenses were $4,4439. And after revenue and expenses, the difference was we came ahead $4,275.61.
Other than your sponsors, where did your additional revenue come from?
Entrance fees for Art Walk,
Okay.
for the businesses.
For the businesses?
Yep, for participation, and for the artists to participate.
Where did the surplus go?
And Readner's coffers, just the general fund. Sorry about that. But it just goes in the...
That was not a good way to put that.
That was not. But it's just in a revenue line item. So we did a Survey Monkey for Art Walk, and we had 8 questions. This is just a snapshot of 2 particular questions, their impressions of Art Walk compared to previous years. And overall, people were about what they expected. And then overall, how satisfied were you with Art Walk? And people were extremely satisfied. So that's just a brief scenario. The questions we asked were, what was your impression of Art Walk 2014 compared to previous years? And then overall, how satisfied were you with Art Walk in 2014? Has any artwork sold? What did you like most about Art Walk 2014? What did you like least? What could the City of Moscow do to improve future Art Walks? And what do you think about having an Art Walk opening reception in June and an Art Walk closing reception in late August? And do you have any comments that you'd like to share about Art Walk? So that was the whole survey, but this is just a brief snapshot of people being satisfied with the event.
So you had 25 respondents.
Mm-hmm. Not a really high response rate. I mean, we sent it out twice to businesses and to artists. So we just didn't hear from many people because they were overly pretty much happy with the event. There wasn't a lot of criticism for the event. The number one takeaway is that we should have businesses open on Saturday morning after Art Walk.
That's true.
To capture the crowd from the market to enhance the exposure of Art Walk. So we did have a wrap-up meeting of positives and negatives with the Art Walk Subcommittee, and there were several really good comments made. Everyone thought that including it with the Republican convention was a really good opportunity for exposure and different numbers. Gina can maybe speak to that, but we had a lot of visitors in town, and it was a great way to show off the city of Moscow. And then we had some people that didn't like the fees associated with food and the health department, and so we'll work on resolving some of that. Some people referenced doing a permit for the entire event for alcohol and food. There was no complaints about the 24-hour street closure, which was really popular. We had a reception here that went 30 minutes over in the city of Moscow because we had too many people in the building here at City Hall. So that was a positive and a negative.
Right.
Yeah. There was just a lot of people. And then we'll probably look at developing a rain plan for that last band. And so that's just a little wrap-up. The water department, of course, always hosts their barbecue during Art Walk, and they had a big success this year with citizens coming to the water department. In planning for 2015, we already saved the date. I checked in twice today with Gina. What's the date? So June 12th, you can put that on your calendar. Some of the planning might be working with community nonprofits for food booths and to assist some of the businesses with food. Working with the businesses to open on Saturday morning for cross-traffic of the event. Redo the call for artists for cover art submission to balance artist submissions. Tom Garfield was awarded the cover art twice, so we might want to revisit the call for artists on that. And then we'll look at all the subcommittee suggestions and work at implementing some changes for 2015. And then, of course, develop a rain plan. I just wanted to remind everybody, tomorrow night is an art opening here in the 3rd Street Gallery, starting at 5 o'clock. We have a student from the University of Idaho who has made lighthouses Lucy Holsnyder, sculpture artist, of Fort Russell historic neighborhood houses. So with that, I'll take any comments, suggestions.
I don't have much other than I think it's a really great thing that goes on here every year and is another wonderful aspect of Moscow being the heart of the arts. I like it a lot.
Thank you, Art.
Your revenues versus your expenses look really good. You twice as much revenue as your expenses. Is that pretty typical of each year, or was this an exceptional year?
This was an exceptional year, I think. Yeah.
Wish everything we did could come out looking like that. That was great. So, John, you got any comments on that?
I didn't go because I went the year before and ended up buying something.
So the whole idea.
So I stayed away.
Well, I went, and I thought it was great, had a good time, and I thought I would pass accolades on to everybody, and especially our street department. I thought what they did, I thought that was great. They even put me up in the bucket truck. And
that was
bounce
fun.
around up there a little bit, so that's great. Thank you for your efforts, both of you.
Welcome.
Appreciate it, and everybody else was on the committee.
Thank you.
Bill's still here. There he is. Proposed zoning code amendments. About this, I think, don't you?
Afternoon, again. Just a brief report on a couple amendments that you will probably be seeing coming your way from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So there are three different legislative amendments that are currently under consideration and review by the Commission. The first of which relates to the allowance of residential uses within commercial zoning districts throughout the city. Currently, residential uses are, the allowance of residential uses are fairly limited in many of the city's commercial districts, probably with the exception of the Central Business District and the UMC District. In a lot of instances, you have to go through a planned unit development or a conditional use permit, or it may not otherwise be allowable in those districts. As you may recall, the proposed discussion that the Commission is having would increase the allowance of residential uses within those areas to really try to facilitate mixed-use development opportunities, and it's both in response to some of the discussion that we've had recently on the North Main Street area and the expansion of the perceived downtown area, really from A to E Street. But it also is a response to several projects and inquiries that our office has received over the course of the last 6 months where there's an individual business owner wanting to put a dwelling above their shop or their place of business, or just investors looking at properties, especially in that North Main area, wanting to put upper floor residential use above ground floor commercial use that's currently really only permitted through the planned unit development process right now. A good example of that was the Anytime Fitness project. When they went through the expansion renovation, they had to go through a PUD process and a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission in order for that project to occur. And the Commission at that time had kind of commented that, boy, we sure like to see more projects like this, and without having to go through that PUD process. So that is currently under review right now. The Planning and Zoning Commission will be looking at a draft ordinance here in the next few weeks, and then that'll move on to public hearing where they can provide a recommendation to the council. Another item under consideration by the Commission are the residential fence height standards within street side yard areas. As you may recall, on July 21st, Pat O'Connell came and provided some comment to the council regarding the standards that exist today that do limit the heights of fences in street side yard areas. Those fences are also limited in the front yard area, but that's not necessarily an area where we see a lot of conflict. Where we do see a lot of conflict is in that side yard area. After the comments were received at the City Council meeting, the Commission did review that standard, looked at standards in other jurisdictions, looked at our history for variance applications we received for fences in street side yard areas, which we've had 7 that have been received and 7 that have been approved in the last 10 years, and ultimately is making recommendations we'll be making a recommendation to the Council to amend that standard to allow for slightly taller fences in those side yard areas. There are a couple of recommendations that are also including with that, that if you are going to have a taller fence than what's maybe currently allowed within the street side area, that there just be a little bit of setback from the public sidewalk, 2 feet, just to allow for snow removal and not to crowd fences right up against. If you're going to have a 6-foot solid fence against a sidewalk, it's nice to have a little bit of breathing room, whether it's a kid on the handlebar or trying to shovel snow in the winter. Just a little bit of separation from that sidewalk. And the other was really looking at side obstruction, and these tend to occur obviously on corner lots where we've got a front yard and a street side yard area, and we want to ensure that they don't create a side obstruction of those intersections. So another recommendation the Commission will be providing will be to limit the height where it's in the vision triangle. That really probably won't cause a difficulty in most circumstances because the front yard area already establishes those fences back from the primary street line, but also that would be a recommendation that they would include as well.
Ask a question real quick, Bill, while you're on the fencing situation. Supposing somebody has a backyard, side yard situation, and they only want to fence in part of the backyard. Say they have a corner lot, for instance. There's nothing that precludes them from only fencing off half the backyard. So the side would be, if they've got a 75-foot wide yard, they could go in 35, 40 feet, and then
certainly
there's nothing that stops them.
There's nothing that limits it. They can place the fence wherever they wish to on the property. It's just when you start to get into those street side or front yard areas, there are some height limitations, and the proposal would increase the allowance of fence heights in those areas, not in the front yard, but only in the street side area. The last item under consideration by the Commission is looking at a lot of record street frontage requirement. This is really a lot of words to say that under the zoning code, there are 2 sections of the zoning code that state that all building lots have to abut a public street other than an alley in order to have access. And there are a number of lots that have been approved by the city over time. Some of those are on kind of the one-way section of Hayes or Hidden Lane or up on Residence. There are a number of different locations where lots have been developed with really nothing other than alley access, or in some instances lots don't even abut the alley and cross a separate property across an easement to gain access. And that was brought to our attention with a recent situation. And so there are a number of lots that have been approved that have access other than a public street. And there are 2 separate sections of the zoning code, as I mentioned, that address that. And on at least one occasion, the city has granted a variance from that requirement in order to allow for a lot to develop. We had a recent application for a very similar situation, at which time there was a question about the ability to grant a variance from that standard. The city's language with respect to variances is fairly broad. The state code's language with respect to variances is fairly narrow. And it's fairly specific that variances can be granted underneath the state code regarding bulk and placement requirements as to lot size, lot coverage, and other ordinance provisions affecting the size or shape of a structure or the placement of the structure upon lots or the size of lots, but nothing regarding street frontage requirements adjacent to lots. And so in response to that, the city attorney has recommended that the Commission consider a amendment to exempt these previously approved and recognized lots from this requirement where they have provided sufficient permanent access via other means, and whether that's because they only access an alley, a private lane, or potentially have an easement in existence. And so that would just exempt that for existing lots that have been approved by the council in the past.
Does that include things like flagpole lots?
Flagpole lots are legally allowable today, so there's no need to accept that. Flagpole lots are required to abut a public street by no less than 20 feet, and so as long as they abut a public street on 20 feet, then they would meet the frontage requirements. It is lots, the issue we have are lots that don't even abut a public street for any length of distance. And so there are a number of them that only have frontage on an alley, and some that don't even front on any kind of public right-of-way but cross some adjacent property, and they have an easement to allow for that access. So as long as adequate access is provided, fire access is provided, these lots would essentially be exempted from this section of the code that was intended to provide for that, for access for servicing and fire protection and all the other things that come along with building structures on lots. So as I mentioned, all those are under review, so staff is working on preparing draft ordinances for the Commission's review. The commission will then conduct public hearings on these and provide recommendations to the council for the council's consideration. So expect to see these coming up in the next 6 to 8 weeks or so.
It's been pretty active. Next report, like Curtis will be discussing some comparisons of fields and facilities usage by the city and by Moscow School District. And Mr. Greg Morrison will be joining us on that. You don't join us very often, Greg, so you'll have to give us your name and your address, your affiliation with the city, and pay grade. Okay, don't.
I already gave the my Social Security one. So.
What do you got, Dwight?
Well, good afternoon. Give to you here some revised memos to what was actually in your packet. I gave one to Stephanie already. And just a couple of quick numbers on it, but I'll point those out as we go through. I was asked to give you a report on the breakdown of the usage on our facilities and parks, the ones that are used between us and the school district. And so that's what we have. So most of this is just on charts, so it's a little easier to understand and read. With Gormley Park, that's city-owned, and of this time that is scheduled, you can see on here on this first chart where the city has 47% of the time and 42% by the school district, and the Moscow Baseball Association has 9%, and then some smaller stuff. Right now that's city-owned, it's city-maintained, there's no use agreement between us and the school district, and there's no fund exchange, no funding exchanges. For Oilier, which is owned by the school district, as you can see, Moscow School District has about 49, I think 46%. Moscow United, that's the soccer, has 36%. Lacrosse has a percentage there, and the city has, I think, 6%. And this is Moscow School District owned. City maintains it. There's no use agreement for that, and there's also no funding exchange on that as well.
What kind of usage with it? Only 6%, Greg. What kind of usage does the city have on that? What do we do with it?
Right now, we just have our adult soccer program that's on it. It's run twice a week for 6 weeks.
Okay, Mountain View is owned by the city. And as you can see, a little difference here. The city uses that, and this is scheduled time, not unscheduled time. The city has about 74% of that time. Moscow United has about 16%, and the Baseball Association has about 8%. And then it's a little bit of smaller usage by others. That's city-owned, it's city-maintained, there's no use agreement for that either, and no funding exchange. And lastly, I have the Moscow Community Playfields, Moscow School District Community Playfields. And this is a best guess at the moment of where things will be. It is Moscow School District owned. It will be maintained by the city. At present, or prior to the construction, we were already maintaining the single field that was out there. There is a usage agreement, and with that, it was 50% on maintenance costs. And that is in the present agreement, or, once these new fields are done as well. What we're estimating at this time is that the school district will have about 45% of the scheduled time. Moscow Baseball Association will have about 15%. A small percentage for lacrosse. U of I has none. Moscow United soccer will have about 20%, and then the Thrasher football, which you hadn't seen on any of the others, they'll have about 11% of usage. Now you have to remember with this too is you have different fields that are specialized for different organization or different sports. So as we were going through this, we, remember it's scheduled time, and I mean there was a point there where we just had to just guesstimate overall what the percentage of time would be. So this is by no means absolute time, and even though thrashers might be on a field playing football, that doesn't mean soccer can't also be going on at the same time, or baseball, or people just recreating in general. And in a nutshell, that's what we have. And in our master plan, if you'll recall, one of the items was within this 5-year time period was to work with the school district and try to come up with a use agreement for all of the properties where we share. And one of the things that I don't have it on the slide here, but it is in your packet, and that's on the facilities, where we do. Let's start with the Herc. Moscow School District runs about 280 hours a year. The charter school, I threw that in because, they're a school and they do use a considerable amount of time, 135 hours. Over at the Egan, neither school has any time scheduled there. West Park Gym, which is owned by the school district, Parks and Rec runs about 80 hours, and over at the high school, when we have art classes that require that, it runs about 9 hours. And that's sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't thing. And with that, open for questions. Not sure what else I can tell you on those. We do have some cost figures of what it costs us to maintain these other fields, maintenance costs, even though we're not charging anybody else. But we do have those if you'd like those.
I would.
Okay. Mountain View costs us about $6,255 a year for maintenance. Euler is about $3,736 a year. And Gormley is heavy cost. It's about $20,277 a year maintenance costs.
And the reason that is so much higher is because
the ball fields, they're skinned in fields. I mean, they take a lot of maintenance, a lot of dragging. They just take a lot of work.
So has the city and the school district begun any discussions on agreements yet?
No.
Is there a projected date for commencing discussions?
Well, no, not exact dates. We wanted to get through the ball field project, what's going to happen over at the school district playfields. So once we know exactly what's really going to happen over there, things can shift as far as where people are playing on the different fields, and so the numbers will change. And, I mean, there might be some places where it won't be needed at all. We just don't know yet, so we wanted that to play out a bit first. But it is required by our master plan to have that done within this period, so within the next 3 to 4 years max. So our hope was, as soon as we have it figured out, we would start that process. We won't just be working on just maintenance agreements. We're looking at repurposing as well. It's a paperwork drill, but it's kind of a philosophical thing where their grounds that aren't necessarily for sports, but open spaces can also be considered open space for recreational purposes, which on paper shows we have more open space in our inventory, which helps us meet the National Rec and Park Association standards, helps you with grant proposal, and things like that. So,
do you feel that Gormley and the community playfields total cost for maintenance will be about the same for each one, or will one be higher, or do you have any idea?
The ball fields, the Joseph Street fields are going to be considerably higher. You have 7 fields over there, or 6 fields compared to just 2 at Gormley.
Right, and Gormley I don't think we're going to have any less use on it. The Moscow School District Community Play Fields is going to help with our needs, but it isn't going to answer all of our needs. I mean, we've got mean, especially this year, we've really increased our outlying areas usage due to losing Joseph. It wasn't just one area that we lost there. We lost football and softball and youth baseball, and I mean, there was a lot of things that we ended up moving around. And so I mean, it'll help with. It will help decrease the amount of usage that it goes, but it's not. We're not there yet. I mean, we will need more at some point.
Well, I don't think that's a big surprise. I mean, we've known we've needed fields, additional fields, and we still need more fields. But I think it's really interesting. My daily routine takes me past the down Mountain View and past the community ball fields on a daily basis. And so it's been interesting all summer to watch the progress, and they're really starting to look nice. You know, they've taken the west fence down, moved it on the other side of the asphalt path. They have all that special topsoil has been laid and raked on the west end now. It's really, really starting to come together, and it's looking really nice. So, anything else, gentlemen?
No,
I look forward to the report.
That. Okay. Well, thanks again.
It's always nice to have a better idea of the amount of resources the city uses, and sometimes the amount of resources other entities don't use.
Well, one of the interesting things that will come out of that evaluation that we do when we're ready, when we do all of that, will be, recreational time that's not scheduled has a value to it. And so as the school district is opening their properties for public recreational use, unscheduled use, there's a value to that too. So that'll be calculated into it too. It's a win-win for everybody with that, but these are the ones that really cost the actual dollars, and just trying to balance that out, and I think everybody will benefit from that.
Well, that and the people that use the ball fields are also the same people that are going to school.
Yes.
So you're getting a little bit more or a combined bang for your buck. So.
Well, even beyond that, when the ball fields aren't even being used, you're going to have the community there just sandlot baseball, whatever, pick up
We hope
games,
so.
It'll
Yeah,
be
absolutely.
Great. Yeah, you bet. Okay, anything else before the committee?
Thank you.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.